All right, we are live. We are live. Welcome everyone to the Spring 2023 Headwaters Research Experience. Thank you for tuning in. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. This is a very special night. We are hitting the milestone for all of the young students in our Research Experience program. The students have been spending the past 14 weeks creating their own novel research projects. The one thing I want to note is that all of these students have come up with the ideas for these projects. They are truly taking ownership of their research, from the inception of the idea to the hypothesis to the research design, through analyzing the data and interpreting that data and pulling it all together so that they can present it here tonight, and also compile all of that within a manuscript, which we are going to highlight later on in the year. Okay, so this is a very special night. This is, I think, the first milestone for all of these young students in becoming, young scientists. This is one of the key stepping stones for any scientist, is disseminating your research, what you found, to the larger population. So before we get started on this special night for all the students and highlighting all of their remarkable work, I'd like to introduce Jack, who's one of the board members of the Headwaters Science Institute. How you doing, Jack?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Dan. My background is as a scientist with UC Davis. I've been a programmer, analyst, and a biostatistical software consultant in many biological fields.
All right.
And I am enjoying helping the young students get some research experience, which is highly needed in this day and age.
No, this is one of my, favorite passions, is teaching students how to do research, how to, analyze data and try and make sense of everything that they are taking in today. So this is a very special program. And now I would like to introduce Sean, who's a researcher at the University of Florida Whitney Lab. Sean, welcome aboard.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate it. And as Dan said, my name is Sean. I'm a researcher here at the University of Florida, specifically just south of St. Augustine in Whitney Marine Lab. And I guess I'd consider myself a wetland ecologist, just because I kind of do a plethora or a diversity of things, working between fishes within some of the fisheries, and then I work biogeochemistry and do essentially utilizing and putting those things together as far as a piece to look at restoration and conservation research. So,
all right. Well, thank you both for coming up here and talking a little bit about yourself. I also forgot to mention myself. My name is Daniel Dudek. I am the program manager for the Research Experience, and I'm the data analyst for Headwaters Science Institute. Yes, so I've helped all of these students throughout the past 14 weeks in designing their research experiments, along with Sean as well. He's the mentor for several of the students who are going to be presenting here today. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and get started. I'll bring you both back up for the Q&A after each presentation.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks.
All right. So without further ado, our first presenter is Shanak Man. He's actually one of my mentees. So Shanak, why don't you tell them about yourself a little bit, and then you can go on and give your presentation. Right.
Thank you, Mr. Dudek. My name is Shanak Man. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm from Michigan. Obviously, this is one of my first in-depth research projects that I've been doing. It's been a great experience so far. I think I would definitely do it again in the future. And that's pretty much it in terms of research.
All right. Well, Shanak, take it away.
Okay. So today we will be looking at the unexpected victims, a closer look at biodiversity challenges that invasive species may be facing. It's by me, Sean McMahon, and my mentor through this process was Mr. Dan Dudek. So we're going to start today by going over the biodiversity crisis as the Earth faces it as a whole, the way that we're constantly changing our allocations and distributions of both our land and natural resources. When we do this, it's speeding up the extinction rate that's driven by the loss of habitats for these species. And it also happens to relocate them as well, moving them around into different areas, which we can see cause a couple of different things. So due to the movement of both plant and animal species, I mean, the two biggest parts or the two biggest outcomes that could end up happening are the species is moved into an ecosystem and it just simply can't survive. It doesn't have the survival tools enough to survive in this new ecosystem, and it just simply goes extinct. The species can also be moved into an ecosystem which it has an advantage over other species that were there prior to the exposure of this new species. The advantage can be a size or any survival tool that just gives them an edge over any of the other species that were there. And that's when we start to call the species invasive, when it starts to take over that ecosystem. So we'll look at some of the negative impacts that they can have. So obviously they can just be detrimental and tear up the ecosystem. They can take up a lot of the food and disrupt the hierarchy and the food pyramid that ecosystem may have prior to their exposure. The public may have to actually fund all of the damage that the invasive species may cause, because, I mean, eventually we need to help out with that ecosystem, because if the species just keeps on eating away at it, it will end up harming the ecosystem to a point where we will need to step in. And the final negative impact that we'll look at is a disease. So depending on like the length of the relocation, if it's super far, the invasive species may carry a disease that the species in the new ecosystem have never been exposed to, and therefore have little to actually no immunity to that disease. So we'll look at some positive impacts that they have. When people think of invasive species, I know it's not the positive things that first come to mind, but they do actually have some positive things. They increase the diversity of the ecosystem. So they bring up the diversity, and they bring obviously a new species to that ecosystem. They help the species that are higher up on them in the food pyramid. They do this because they're invasive, they just have so many of their species that they're helping the survival rate of the species that are above them in the food pyramid. And they also a lot of the times help with agricultural decomposition of the ecosystem as well, which actually does help the ecosystem in the long run. So we'll move into my research question. Are invasive species themselves facing a biodiversity crisis? So the three kind of variables that we'll look at today are the population trend status, which is just in simple terms increasing or decreasing. The conservation classification in terms of how close the species is to extinction. So most of the time today we'll be seeing either stable, vulnerable, endangered, and stuff like that, least concern. And the population fragmentation. So this will show if it's significantly or not significantly impacted as a species as a whole. And overall, I think that the populations of invasive species are going to experience a decrease in population with a population fragmentation. So overall, facing a biodiversity crisis. So we'll actually look at an example today. We have the Burmese python, which a lot of people know about, and it's mostly found in the Everglades and southern parts of Florida. It's actually native to China and Southeast Asia. And when we took a closer look at this, as many know, it is invasive to that area. We found that the population of the Burmese python is actually decreasing, and it's not yet severely fragmented, but it is listed as vulnerable as the species as a whole. So we'll look at a plant species as well. This is the tree of heaven. It's found a lot of places in the continental United States, but it's native to China and Taiwan. And even though the species is invasive, it's actually facing a decreasing population trend with a fragmented population and a conservation status of endangered. So it's actually something that we want to preserve more than actually destroy. So we'll look at how did I actually end up getting all of these variables. I looked at the IUCN Red List of threatened species, which I was able to find the specific information on different invasive species from around the world and their status as a species as a whole, how they're really doing. And then we used a statistical analysis using the chi-squared goodness of fit test. We got a p-value, which would show us the significance and if the species was facing any significant change in that variable. So the first variable that we'll look at was the first one we covered, the population trend. So just to clarify, there was other species that were tested as well. So for the whole data set of species, we found the p-value for this one was about 0.34. So it does not show a significantly different number than expected. So the p-value here did not support my hypothesis. And we'll now look at population fragmentation. So the p-value here is actually less than 0.01. As you can see on the graph, really one was very significantly population fragmented with the other 11 not being. So again, here it did not support my my hypothesis either. And finally, we'll look at the conservation status, which was less than 0.1 as well. So we can see here that there was 2 species that were listed as vulnerable, one as endangered, but then the other 9 as least concern. So again, here it did not support my hypothesis that was made earlier in the slideshow. So overall, are they facing a biodiversity crisis? They're not facing a crisis as a whole. But it is also very, very important to note that there are species out there, invasive species out there that are facing a decreasing population trend and are actually population fragmented, like the tree of heaven and Burmese python that we looked at, which is why it's very important now more than ever to do more research before taking action or urging others to take action. So the p-values indicated by the chi-square goodness of fit test were the actual results that we wanted to look for, and those were the ones that would actually give us what we wanted in terms of my hypothesis. So with these not supporting, with all 3 not supporting my hypothesis, the data did not support my hypothesis. So moving into more of a discussion into everyday life. So invasive species are more often than not looked down upon. And when you first think of it, it's just human nature to think, oh, it's kind of being detrimental to an ecosystem. We want to just get rid of it. But much of the time we have to do extensive research before taking action. And then it also touches on the ethicalities of hunting as well. Whether hunting should be something that you just go out and do or something that you actually do the research on for population trends and fragmentations as well. So in the future, some extensive research that I could do to kind of extend on this presentation. Are humans the actual cause of the movement of invasive species? Are we the ones that are actually moving them from point A to point B and introducing them into an ecosystem that they should not be in? What can everybody do to help stop the spread of invasive species and kind of ensure that they're not in an ecosystem near them? I could also use a wider geological search range and find invasive species from different ecosystems as well, maybe aquatic ecosystems and desert ecosystems. And then the final thing is maybe use a larger sample size of invasive species to kind of make that data set a little bit bigger and give us maybe a little bit more accurate data. Okay, and these are my references. And that is it.
All right, Shanak. Well, great job. Great job.
Thank you.
Again, I think, your project was pretty interesting considering, I think the topic you covered is something that not a lot of people, really do think about. When you mentioned you wanted to investigate invasive species and how detrimental they are to ecosystems, and also not only that, but are they facing a biodiversity crisis? Because like the two examples you supplied within your presentation, they are, there are instances of invasive species as a whole being vulnerable or endangered with, decreasing population trends. So, I really think, your project was pretty interesting in that regard. You're investigating something that, not everybody investigates. So it was great job. Great job.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So I'm going to bring up Jack and Sean. And so both of you, so what did you think about Chinook's research?
Well, I guess I had the question of what mechanism did you imagine would cause or would be related to a decrease or becoming more scarce of the invasive species? And I assume you were thinking worldwide.
Yeah. So, before I had conducted this research, what first came to mind when I thought invasive species was just, we need to get rid of them. We need to get rid of them. We need to get them out of the ecosystem. And two things came to mind. One was just simply hunting them. The other one was relocating them. And I felt like the easier option for the everyday person would just be to hunt them. So I kind of just wanted to look into seeing if it was a good idea to proceed with that, and to see if more invasive species than not were actually facing a decreasing population trend, rather than just being what first comes to mind when we think of invasive species, of just increasing populations one after the other and just taking over the ecosystem completely.
Well, your research is asking a timely question, I think, because as the Earth warms, we're finding species moving north or moving south to stay within their temperature requirements or altitude requirements or resource requirements. And I think the larger question then becomes, by hunting or trying to eliminate an invasive species, are we taking away its potential habitat or not? So good.
Thank you.
Right. What about you, Sean?
Well, first of all, I just want to say I'm born and raised in Michigan, so I understand that. But yeah, no, it's a very interesting topic. There's a few things now that I work down here, and I worked in the Everglades, so I can tell you firsthand the Burmese pythons are.
Yep. Yeah.
They're okay. There's still quite a few. Yeah. So I guess my question to you would be, so because I work in this field, right? This is what I do. I'm literally working on a project right now.
Yep.
We have mangroves are invasive, right, in northern Florida in a section, right? But so my question to you, because I agree with you, I think you can't just create a blanket approach to these things, right? We have to understand that biodiversity as a whole is decreasing, right, across the globe, which is something you brought up, which is very good. But the ultimate question too that you have to then ask is, okay, so when you look at some of these systems, are they still viable habitats, right? What do you coin, right, as that habitat that can be? Is it productive as an ecosystem as a whole? Or are you creating a very homogeneous system, right? And we see this in a lot of systems down here, right? In some of the coral reefs where you have lionfish, right? We see fish species dropping out. In the Everglades, we saw species dropping out until we started, killing off the Burmese. So you see some of these certain areas where invasives are changing, right? And that's more of your fauna invasives. But then you also brought up, which I like, the flora side, right? The plant side of things. And so, right, we see in a system like here where I'm working, right, mangroves add so Spartina is a grass, it's a salt marsh grass, right? If we think of a tree, it's a three-dimensional structure versus, right, grass is not, it's a herbaceous, it doesn't give you as much habitat. So, someone might argue that, oh, well, the mangroves might actually be better because, well, it's going to sequester more carbon. It's going to create a three-dimensional habitat, right? So now there's more habitat by volume. But at the end of the day, is that actually viable for the other, species that were a part of that system? So to me, my question to, I guess my long-winded question is, how do you measure something like, what do you give as saying what invasive is good and what invasive is bad? That would be my kind of question to you, and it's not an easy one, right? Like, this can take you a long time to figure out, right? But that would be my question for you, if this is of interest, start thinking, because this is going to be problems you're going to have to tackle, in the future.
Right. Yeah. So definitely. So on that topic of which actually cause more damage than others, it can maybe help to not only check the population trend of that species itself, but also maybe do a little bit of research maybe in other different species in that ecosystem, and maybe see how their populations are doing in terms of exposure to that new invasive species. And then we can then look at and maybe cross-check them and see which one has more of an impact than the other.
All right. Well,
Yeah, I would throw in one more thing, and that is, as you go forward, if you stay in this area, which it sounds like you have an interest in, be careful about hypothesis testing and looking at too narrow a section. In ecology, a major hurdle is to include as many of the variables and variable species in the web of life that is affected by your particular species in question. And ecologists have not done very well over the last 50 years in sorting that out. We've been mesmerized, if you will, by the physical sciences, and it's finally coming to light that we have to think more in systems manner rather than in strict frequentist manner.
all right. Well, Chinook, I think it's a great sign whenever your presentation sparks a great conversation, which is good. So great job doing that. And I think what we're going to do is I'm going to bring up our next presenter. All right. But again, great job, Chinook.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Very good job.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So our next presenter is Jana Palmer. So Jana, I know your work is absolutely fascinating. I'm so excited to share your work with everyone in the audience. You did an amazing job working with Dr. John Lewis, and so please give a little background about yourself, and then share with us your great work.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. So I'm Jana, like you said, and I am from Truckee, California, more specifically Donner Summit. So quite a bit of snow, which really kind of created me to want to do this project. And yeah, so I'm really excited to share this with you guys.
All right, take it away.
So I worked alongside my mentor, Dr. John M. Lewis, using the Markov process to forecast yearly snowfall in the Sierra Nevada mountains. To conduct this research, we used the data collected at the Central Sierra Snow Lab on Donner Summit. The Central Sierra Snow Lab, or CSSL, is currently run by Andrew Schwartz and the University of California, Berkeley, and they have a set of data, as shown here on the screen, measuring annual snowfall amount along with total snowfall depth ranging from the years 1879 to present. So in this graph, the gray lines represent the total annual snowfall amount. Based on observation alone, you can see that there are no major patterns in the data, except for the fact that very high snowfall years are rarely ever followed by another high snowfall year, and low snowfall years or drought years often occur in groups of 3 to 5, as we can see in the most recent drought years of 2013 to 2015. The snowpack in the Sierra Nevada mountains acts as a natural reservoir to hold water that is used across California for agricultural, recreational, and residential purposes. Donner Summit specifically receives the most snowfall out of almost any other residential area in the continental United States. This project has been specifically interesting to me because, like I said, I live on Donner Summit and have skied every winter since I was very little and just have a love for snow. And yeah. The overarching question we worked to answer in this research was, using previous snowfall data, what is a probabilistic prediction for next year's total annual snowfall amount? So before beginning, I hypothesized that because this year, 2022 to 2023, was appearing to be a very large snowfall year, it is most likely next year it will result in a low to medium snowfall total. Numerical weather prediction uses atmospheric and oceanic models to predict weather between 10 days and 2 weeks out based on current conditions. Currently, trying to predict weather beyond this 10-day to 2-week period has proven very difficult to do accurately using forecasting methods, and forecasters rely on database methods to create predictions. Even so, scientists such as Sarah Kapnick, in her study on predicting seasonal snowpack for the western United States, have completed studies which combine results from 4 to 6 general circulation climate models, which is also known as an ensemble prediction, to attempt to predict future snowpack in the western United States. Kapnick's research, however, concluded that Sierra Nevada snowpack is not predictable at 8-month lead times, which was the model focus. So in this project, we used data collected at the Central Sierra Snow Lab on Donner Summit with the Markov chain process to form a probabilistic snowfall amount for next year. Established by the Russian mathematician Andrei Markov, a Markov chain is a computational tool which describes a sequence of events in which each event depends on the one before it. So to use a Markov chain, system states must be specified, and the transition from one state to the next must also be specified. One simple example of a Markov chain method, often used in textbooks and other literature, is the Land of Oz example. In the Land of Oz, they're trying to predict what weather will occur tomorrow based on the weather that occurred today. So in this diagram, the top on the screen, the first row shows that if today is rainy, which is represented by R, there's a 50% chance tomorrow will be rainy again, and a 25% chance that tomorrow will either be nice weather or snowy. And the same goes for these rows down here. This diagram can also be shown as a chain connecting each state to another one or back to itself. The data provided by the Central Sierra Snow Lab ranges from 300 to 2100 centimeters of snow. And so to begin the Markov process, we divided the data into 5 equally distributed states, where state A is the lowest and state E is the highest snowfall, as shown here on the screen. Using these states, the data, years 1879 to 2019, was put into a probability matrix, this 5x5 grid on the right of the screen. An example of the years 1879 to 1889 is shown at the bottom of the slide, where the top row shows the year, the rows below that show the year's total snowfall and its correlating state, and most importantly, the letters at the bottom show the transition between years. For example, 1879 to 1880 is the transition of state C to state E. These transitions between every year were then tallied into the probability matrix. For example, the transition between 1879 to 1880 was one of 4 tallies out of 140 total transition states. Finished tallying all the transitions, we then added all the tallies of each row to establish this row total. We were able to find, or by dividing the tallies of each square by its correlating row total, we were able to find a percentage, the bottom number in each grid, of how likely it would be for a state this year to be followed by a state next year. For example, this grid here shows that if this year's snowfall falls into state B, there's a 7% chance that next year will have state A snowfall, but there's a 42% chance that if this year's state B, next year will also be state B, based on the data from 140 years. Based on our model, we predict that next year's snowfall season for 2023 to 2024 will fall under State B, producing 660 to 1,020 centimeters of snow. This year has already produced just over 1,870 centimeters of snow on Donner Summit, putting it in State E snowfall. So, according to a probability matrix, there's a 66% chance that next year's total snowfall amount will fall under State B, 660 to 1,020 centimeters of snow. So what does this mean for us? There's a 66% chance that next year we will receive between 660 to 1,020 centimeters of snow, meaning snowfall next year has a very likely chance to be below Donner Summit's annual average, which is approximately 1,043 centimeters. But is this information enough to change California's water usage habits? We've established there's a very likely chance next year we will receive below average snowfall. But is that enough reason for people to lower their personal water usage, for farms in California's vast agricultural regions to conserve water, or even for ski resorts to prepare for less than normal snow? On another note, although we have created a mostly effective matrix of which we've been testing for the past 2 months, simply analyzing data to predict weather has quite a few faults. For one thing, it does not take into account changing weather patterns such as climate change or large weather events like El Nino. Additionally, coming back to what I talked about earlier, years following the extremes are easiest to predict. High extreme years have never been followed by another high snow year, and low snowfall years or drought years often comes in groups of 3 to 5. If we look back at our matrix, we can see that predicting these middle snowfall states can be difficult, as some grids have very similar probabilities. So, although John and I have created a very solid base for seasonal snowfall predictions, there's still a lot of work to be done to establish a way in which scientists can confidently predict a total snowfall amount for next year. Thank you.
All right. Well, Jana, absolutely fantastic job, and I definitely want to say, this is one of the highlights of the program. You were able to work with Dr. John Lewis, utilize over 140 years worth of snow data to actually come up with this amazing result. And it's, very impactful, especially to the locals within Truckee. So everyone who lives in Truckee out there, you have a 66% chance that it's going to be, some lighter snow compared to, the average, which is, I don't know if that's a good or bad thing. You skiers will have to tell me whether or not that's a good or bad thing. But yeah, absolutely fantastic job. So my first question before I bring up Sean and John, what were some highlights about the program, and what were some of your struggles?
Yeah, so I really loved, I think the highlight of this program was doing the actual research with John. I've always really enjoyed like math and science, and so being able to put them together in a new way for me has been, a pretty great experience and really exciting sometimes. And then I guess kind of a struggle from this would basically be writing the manuscript, because trying to fit all that we did in a nice organized paper.
Yeah. Okay. That's a reasonable struggle. I think a lot of people will say that's a struggle for the program, but it's definitely worth it in the end.
Yeah.
All right. So Jack and Sean, what did you think of Jana's research?
I thought it was a timely as well as a very nice job. Thank you. It's a very complicated subject as well. I think it was nice to hear you mention El Nino and La Nina as potentially conflicting or exacerbating aspects of the research. I would be real pleased if in the future you would take a further step and perhaps parse out the data set 2-year, 3-year, or 4-year, or 5-year cycles, if they can be identified, even if they can be roughly identified, and then look at La Nina and El Nino cycles, using them in a likelihood ratio manner to determine whether there was perhaps a better correlation of predictability within one or the other cycle, which would then help narrow down this very complicated area.
Yep. No, so what about you, Sean? And any comments?
Yeah, I mean, great job, first of all. Yeah, I guess my question would be to you guys, and this would be I guess I want to pose this as a thought-provoking question, right? I have some geology training, and so geologists always talk about data sets are 1,000 years, right? Or, if you could get a larger data set, / if you could even break up your data set, right? I'm going to kind of piggyback off Jack here. But you have, right, we in ecology really look at the last 30 years of climate and weather and kind of putting that into our climate models, right? Using that weather to put into a climate model, right? So I was curious, have you thought about breaking, using your hypothesis that you created, using that for just the last 30 years of your data set?
Yeah, as in creating like a separate probability matrix using the more recent data.
Mm-hmm. Just the recent data to see if you have a change.
Yeah, we've done quite a few tests with the probability matrix, and we figured that, or like we kind of decided that the more data, we kind of figured even 140 years is not that much data, and so
for climate
to have the strongest like probability going back as many years as we could would be the best, but that would be an interesting test to see if how 30 years would affect it.
Well, we just think of, right, our last 30 years has been the most up and down, so that should theoretically give you the most change or diverse data points.
Yeah.
Versus a fairly cyclical data set.
Yeah.
And it's clear that the overall climate change has hockey sticked up well within that last 30 years, even though it has been climbing roughly since Industrial Revolution. But it's very pronounced in just since I retired, basically, which was 22 years ago.
All right. Well, thank you, Sean and Jack, again.
And enjoy your skiing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you, Sean and Jack. All right. So, Jana, again, fantastic job. I'm really excited to hear the updates for your research moving forward, because I know you have a lot of, plans with either following up on your research or, sharing it with, potential conferences or maybe some publications in the future. So again, fantastic job.
Yeah. Thank you, Dan.
All right. So our next presenter is, that's his slides. Isaac Pacheco Martinez. Isaac, how are you doing? Are you there? I think you might be on mute. Are you there, Isaac? Seems we may be suffering some technical difficulties. How about this, Isaac? I'm actually going to pull up our next presenter. So, Andrew, I know this is a little bit of a jump on you. You're presenting next, but can you go ahead and share your screen, and we'll be able to move to the next presentation while Isaac, figures out his technical situation.
Sure. Can you give me a second to get it all set up?
Yep, of course.
Can you see my screen?
Yep. Yeah, and Andrew, I think your project was pretty unique because I think you were one of the few individuals who actually collected field data. So I'm excited to share your experiences with everyone here. So go ahead and take it away, Andrew.
Thank you. So, hi, my name is Andrew Logan, and today I'm going to be presenting the effects of water chemistry on plant diversity on the bank of a Northern California creek. So, to start, there are various sources of water pollution that can negatively affect the quality of water in Buda Creek. Urban areas are one of the sources of water pollution, as stormwater runoff from these areas can carry pollutants such as oil, grease, heavy metals, and other chemicals from streets, parking lots, and industrial sites into nearby water bodies. Agricultural runoff is also a significant source of water pollution, as fertilizers, pesticides, and animal waste from farms can contaminate nearby watersheds, contributing to issues such as eutrophication of a watershed, which is when algae comes in grows in the watershed and chokes everything out, and harmful algal blooms, which is the same sort of thing. Additionally, airborne pollutants can contribute to water pollution through atmospheric deposition, where pollutants are deposited into water bodies through precipitation or dry deposition. Boating and recreational activities can also add to water pollution in lakes, rivers, and coastal areas, such as fuel spills, litter, and other waste from these activities. It can contaminate water sources. So there are several factors of both water chemistry and plant diversity which I studied in my presentation. For water chemistry, I studied the TDS, the pH, the nitrates, and the carbonate. So to start, pH is a measure of acidity and alkalinity, which is affected by factors like fertilizer being added to water or other chemicals as well. Total dissolved solids can refer to the amount of inorganic and organic substances present in water and can impact water quality and taste, with a very high or low concentrations causing issues in the water itself. Carbonate is a mineral that can affect the pH of water and play a role in buffering against changes in pH. Lastly, nitrates are nitrogen-based compounds that can be found in fertilizer that can be highly soluble in water, and in higher concentrations cause eutrophication of waterways. So I studied plant diversity by taking two factors, which were the species richness, which refers to the total number of different plant species in an area, a quadrat, or an ecosystem, regardless of distribution, and plant evenness, I studied that too, and it refers to the distribution of each plant species in a community. So my research question for this project was, how does water chemistry affect the diversity of terrestrial plants along the banks of different water sources in Northern California? My four independent variables, were pH, TDS, nitrates, and carbonate. My dependent variable was plant diversity, which was a metric of species richness divided by plant abundance. My hypothesis was the more basic, the more applicable pH, so the farther it was from 7 and higher the nitrates, TDS, and carbonate samples are, the lower plant diversity there would be. To conduct my experiment, I took 7 water samples in the early spring of 2023 along Buda Creek, California, and collected them for 7 weeks. At each site, I used 3 identical 250 milliliter mason jars. Each site had a unique geography and species composition, which is why they were chosen. A 1 square meter quadrat was used to count the plant species and individuals at each site to calculate plant diversity. Diversity was calculated as the number of species divided by the number of plants, which is simple and accurate. However, this method doesn't consider the relative abundance of species and may not be sensitive to environmental disturbance. So I sampled seven different locations along the latter third of Buda Creek, which is a major stream in Northern California and ultimately a tributary of the Sacramento River. It's 85 miles long and has its headwaters in the coastal range of California, which is north of San Francisco, and it flows east through several dams. My study was taken in the latter third of the creek, and it's largely surrounded by agriculture. To orient you on the left, this is a map of California and Nevada with San Francisco and Puda Creek is to the northeast of San Francisco. And on the map on the right, you can see the 7 different sites that I took samples from. So figure 1 shows the effects of pH, nitrates, carbonate, and TDS on plant diversity. Part A shows the mean pH against the plant diversity, and it shows that there's little indication that there's a relationship between the mean pH and plant diversity with an R-squared value of 0.158. Part B shows the mean nitrates versus the plant diversity, and there's also little indication that there's a relationship between the nitrates and plant diversity with an R-squared value of 0.217. Part C shows mean carbonate versus plant diversity, and there's also little indication that there's a relationship between the carbonate and plant diversity with an R-squared of 0.215. Part D shows total dissolved solids versus plant diversity, and there's no indication at all that there's a relationship between TDS and plant diversity with an R-squared of 0.00148. Figure 2 shows the effects of carbonate, pH, TDS, and nitrates on species richness. Part A shows the mean carbonate against the species richness, and there's a very significant negative correlation between the carbonate and the number of species in the site, with an R-squared value of 0.962. Part B shows the mean total dissolved solids against the species richness, and there's also little indication that there's a relationship between the two with an R-squared value of 0.176. Part C shows the mean nitrates versus species richness, and there's no indication that there's a relationship between the nitrates and the species richness with an R-squared of 0.0189. Lastly, Part D shows the mean pH versus species richness, and there's no indication that there's a relationship between the mean pH and the species richness with an R-squared of 0.00628. Studied the effects of water chemistry on plant diversity along Puda Creek. The hypothesis was that changing water chemistry would lead to changing plant diversity, but the main results showed little indication of this effect. A very strong correlation was found between species richness and the carbonate sample in the water. Calcium, which is a main component of carbonate, is used as a catalyst for plant metabolism, allowing plants to use other nutrients such as nitrogen and phosphorus. If there's more calcium available, there'd be enhanced use for nitrogen and phosphorus. So this experiment was conducted in early spring when many plants are starting to grow. So this would be one of the first things that could influence plant growth. Total dissolved solids, TDS, had no correlation with plant diversity, and nitrates also showed a positive trend, but little correlation. The experiment was conducted in early spring, which may have impacted the results, and continued data collection over 6 months could provide different results. Also, it was raining during data collection, and that may have diluted the water and affected the findings of my project. There are many different possibilities for future research, including researching the longer-term effects, different bodies of water, how water chemistry affects the soil, and how water chemistry affects plant chemistry. Longer-term effects could be studied at the same areas as the samples or at different places over several months or even years. Different bodies of water could be studied, including lakes, rivers, and reservoirs of water. Finally, we could also incorporate soil chemistry or plant nutrient analysis into our study to see if the water chemistry also affects soil and or plant nutrients and how this may influence the diversity of terrestrial plants. This concludes my presentation, and here are my sources. I'd like to thank Dan Dudek for his mentorship, his interest in my project, and his encouragement throughout the entirety of my project. And thank you for watching my presentation.
All right. Great job, Andrew. Great job. Let me go ahead and bring this down. Okay, perfect. You did that for me. Yeah. So again, fantastic job. What I do like to see is individuals, going outside and collecting data out in the field, which is always good. So what were some of your favorite parts of the program?
I think one of my, like you said, going out and collecting the data itself was really fun because you got to be out there and measure everything, take the samples, and then processing the samples was also fun. And thinking of why different correlations happen was really interesting to me as well.
Yeah, and it seemed like you sampled quite a number of locations across a far distance. So,
Yeah.
so good job and kudos to you on that as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So let me bring up Jack and Sean. So what do you both of you think about Andrew's research he did?
Go ahead, Sean. I've been.
Andrew, great job. First of all, it's really funny that part of one of my master's projects was actually kind of looking into some of this. I created a metric of using foliar analysis and backtracking that to the soil pH. So
Oh, wow.
I guess my question to you would be, what kind of things do you think are influencing? Like, obviously, I'm sure you're aware there are other things, drivers, right, further up in the soil. But I guess my question to be, have you thought about using pH as a driver into that biodiversity metric that you're creating? Like so essentially, right, creating like an ANOVA using multiple statistical pieces to that to see if pH really drives, right? Because we think of pH as something that releases or allows more nutrient to flow through a soil.
Yeah,
especially in that kind of a system.
Yeah, so my study was a cross-sectional study, one period in time, and it was also raining. And like you said, pH, like that, like I said in my presentation, pH could influence. Like I didn't get much of a trend, but because that was a cross-sectional study. But later in the future, if I do more time or I look at soil pH and plants, like how their chemistry as well, I think that could be interesting.
All right.
A question I have.
Just your soil type. Sorry, Jack.
That's okay. Yeah, it wasn't clear to me, and you probably stated it and I missed it. Where did you take your chemistry measurements? In the water or on the wet bank next to it? Or
Yeah, sorry if it wasn't clear. I took my measurements inside the water itself, right next to the bank. And I took
okay,
different measurements so to rule out some of the variants. However, farther out in the creek, there could have been different results. That's one flaw of my study.
well, knowing Pewter Creek pretty well, living in Davis, there's many different aspects. And what month did you start your data collection?
I started my data collection in early March, and as you might know, it was raining a lot in early March.
Okay, so we already had a fairly high water flow
Yeah,
through Pewter Creek, which may well have been washing out local chemical constituents. What criteria did you use to choose your sites?
I chose different sites I chose different sites based on what plants there were, like the difference in plants. For example, some sites had only one species of plants, like everything was overgrown with there's this thistle plant, and I did not choose those sites. And also because as you might know, a lot of Poudre Creek is alongside fields, which are blocked off because there's levees around the fields. So I wasn't able to access those. So in the map, you might have seen a big gap in areas that I measured. It was all based on access as well.
Sure. I guess it would be interesting to know what the river flow or stream flow rate was at the sites that you chose. Just in as I mentioned, the chance that they were very exposed to current and thus not representative of what was being absorbed locally by the plants.
That's true.
It would be nice to know what the stream conditions were and you might put that in your write-up at the particular sites, whether there was a backwater there that actually was sequestering the nutrients or not. Where did you take it? The most western site that you had, it looked like it was well above Solano Lake.
Yeah, it was maybe a few miles south of Lake Berryessa. Or not south, sorry, east of Lake Berryessa.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Mhm.
All right. Thank you, Jack and Sean, for your input. Again, it's always great to. I think it's pretty cool for Jack to know so much about the location that you were sampling in, which is always a fun situation to be in, to get some insight on their perspectives of the location. Yeah.
Well,
All
thank
right.
you.
Yeah. All right. So Andrew. Now, I think I'm going to have you step off, and we are going to bring up Jaden. All right, Jaden Patel, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing well. Thank you for asking.
All right, so are you ready to present today?
Yes, I am ready to present today.
All right. Okay, so Jaden's doing a unique project, really focused on, something that he's very passionate about, and especially that impacts, him and a lot of his friends within the sporting, within high school athletes as well. So Jaden, take it away.
Yeah, so my presentation is the effects sports have on diet and health. My mentor was Dan, and this is a cool experiment that I did. Yeah, so this is my introduction. So the topic I was discussing is athlete diet and mental health. So I do wrestling and I play football, and I found myself doing things like weight cuts for wrestling that were a lot of lack of food, and then a lot of eating when I came into football, and it was just a lot of change in weight, and it just put a lot of mental stress on me. And so I thought I'd do an experiment on it, where I can and I thought I might do an experiment. So I compared different sports like football, baseball, wrestling, track, and soccer, and I wanted to see if they all went through the same thing. I did a lot of background research on this first, and I found different sites and stuff that showed how mental stress can happen through diets and weight cuts and all sorts of things. The research question I had is, does different sports compare with diet, health benefits, and downsides while playing the sport? The independent variable was the sport the athlete plays, and the dependent variable was the hours of sleep, life satisfaction, hours of studying, caloric intake during sports activities. My hypothesis was that, like, during the sports season, everything would go down. Like, your caloric intake would go down. You'd be more mentally stressed. You'd have less sleep, less studying hours, and really it would just be a more stressful time than it would be outside of the season, and it'd be bad. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but like, you just be more stressed out. The way I did this experiment to see if this was true was I got 17 different athletes to do a survey. These were all friends on my wrestling team or football team, and people who did things such as track and soccer at my school. And they filled out the form, so I know if they went through if they did anything that went through any of those things in my independent variable. So here are some of the results. So I made these graphs using Data Classroom, and I looked at the p-value to show which graphs I wanted to show. The first one is studying hours of sports and sleep hours. I'm comparing the two. So this graph kind of shows that the more sleep you got, the less studying hours you really had. And this was during in season during sports. So it kind of showed an increase in sleep and a digression in your studying, which supports my hypothesis in the fact that your studying hours went down, but it does not support my hypothesis in and the fact that your sleep hours went higher. But due to the p-value was 0.365, which shows a really bit high thing towards my hypothesis. Daily caloric intake and diet. This was the second one. Now, this shows a direct correlation with people in a diet and calories consumed during sports season. And the p-value was 0.36. So it wasn't really that big. And as you can see, it was really spread out. But with the people who were on diets, you can see they consume less calories than the people that were. And these diets were done in sports season. So you can see those who decided to diet consume less calories than those who did. So this supports my hypothesis. Diet and life satisfaction. This one I was very surprised with because it got a 0.02 p-value. But this also supported my hypothesis because it shows here that the people who dieted, which in the other graph showed that you had a less caloric intake, were dissatisfied or like neutral about, we had more people dissatisfied or neutral about kind of like life satisfaction, which can be due to stress and stress about your sports and school and things like that. And I think diet played and this kind of shows that diet plays a little bit of a role in that. There weren't too many people that did it. That's why the p-value is probably too low. But I'd say this agreed with my hypothesis a little bit, but not to the complete value, not as much as I'd like. This one was the caloric difference and studying hours. So this one had a very high p-value. This was 0.483. So this shows that the more studying hour, this difference between the amount of calories you ate and the studying hours, and it showed like the more you ate, the less kind of you studied, and it showed here. Now the p-value is really high, so this supports and doesn't support my hypothesis as well, because the studying hours went down during sports season, which is something that I put in my hypothesis. Yet the calories in this one were going higher in the caloric difference. The caloric difference was the comparison between out of season and in season. This could be why the studying. This could be why the calories were kind of why calories did not go the way I wanted it to with the studying hours and did not directly correlate the way I thought it would. So here, what I really noticed was that in my results, it was more or less half of my hypothesis was true, yet at the same time it wasn't, because this experiment results the majority of wrestlers and football players, and majority of them were also on diet of like 20,000 calories plus. Athletes average around 6 to 8 hours of sleep. And outside of sports season, every athlete expects to spend 1.5 hours of studying, and then 2 hours. But in season, went to 1.5 studying hours. The life satisfaction athletes stayed sort of the same, with 16 saying satisfied, but like the one person saying dissatisfied. So that kind of didn't play a role. So a lot of the stuff I put on my thing didn't play a role, but some of when you compared all the different questions together, it created some things that I didn't even realize until I made the graphs, such as things that had a high p-value, such as the graph before. This really showed how that graph really supported my hypothesis, but at the same time it didn't. And that was kind of like how my experiment went. There was stuff that didn't support it and did support it, such as like calories consumed. It went down during the sports season, but at the same time, sleep hours went up when people consumed higher calories. I mean, studying hours went down when people consumed higher calories. So it all depended on how you compared the results. You couldn't just have one straight result, because you weren't going to get a very good p-value off of that, and you wouldn't have had very accurate results. So in my future research, I'd like to do this on a larger scale because with only 17 athletes, it was really hard to kind of get the results in the graphs the way I wanted it to and get very strong details. So I'm thinking of putting it on Instagram and Reddit for future research. So that way people have more awareness of what's going on with wrestling and football and like sort of there's more awareness around it. And there is more awareness around wrestling and especially like weight gains and weight losses, things like that, and mental stress of athletes. Because in my time as an athlete, they had things that such as like weigh-ins before you could start weight cutting to show like where you can stop. This actually helped a lot of people not stress as much about making weight in wrestling and things such as like going to office hours for school. So people didn't stress about studying when in season for sports. And I'd like to just get more people to fill out a form like this, so that way I can get more people's results. So that way I can get a better accuracy of how really people wanted to look at this. This is my works cited. And yes, thank you for listening.
All right, Jaden. Yeah, I think it's definitely a very important issue that you were covering. Good job on doing the work. I agree with you. I think a larger sample size is definitely needed. Because this is essentially a case study for a small group of individuals at your school, and I think I think with all these types of survey based studies, it's definitely important to get a large number of participants so that you can accurately you know so you can have accurate results and you can gain some insight into the things that you were investigating. But yeah, I mean, even for me, I think when you were mentioning the pre-weigh-in before the actual weigh-in, that's definitely a new phenomenon. When I was in high school, when I was wrestling, we didn't have any type of precautions or preliminary weigh-ins before that. So students would do exactly like you said. They would have extreme caloric deficits, going into the weigh-in, and actually starve themselves prior to the weigh-in. So yeah, I think it's a very timely topic, especially with student athletes. And yeah, good job. And I definitely agree with you with collecting more data will lead to better results, because yeah, a lot of what you had was pretty insignificant. Right now, you were able to draw some general conclusions with some of the patterns that you saw within your data. But yeah, I think increasing your sample size will definitely help out in the future for future research. So with that, I'll bring in Jack and Sean real quick. Any comments? Any comments or suggestions for improvement for Jaden here, aspiring young scientist?
Okay, maybe I missed something, but I had a question as what you meant by caloric differences on one of your graphs.
So yeah, so the caloric difference was I got the average between the calories intake out of season versus in season,
Ah,
because I was not getting a very high p-value when it was out of season by itself in there and in season by itself. And I kind of talked about how like you had to mix around all the different things you got to kind of get your results, because if you put it all kind of separate by separate, you weren't going to get like the full kind of results, because all compares differently with different things.
Well, and then remember, the difference truly represents how much of a caloric deficit the student had whenever they were participating in sports versus not participating in sports. Yeah. So how extreme was that deficit, or how many more calories did they consume when participating in that sport?
You asked a lot of questions about your participants, and you mentioned in your summary or your discussion that increasing the number of participants in the study would give you a finer point on your results. I would ask you to think about other factors that might give you more more significant and more insightful results. I'm thinking of things like what sport they're in, what stage of being in or out of the sport they're in, how much they weigh, and there's even the psychological question that could be expanded in your satisfaction question to them. You know, what is it that they feel more or less satisfied about? And it may have a lot to do with their family life rather than what's going on in the sports arena with them. So I guess my overall suggestion is to think about confounding variables and maybe narrow your research. But it's a laudable effort to go ahead and grab 17 very active and distracted teenagers to try and get them to answer a questionnaire.
Yeah, it was
But
very.
thanks for that.
Yeah,
it
I
was
think
very-
Jaden, you were. I mean, I think for the first 3 weeks of the program, you were competing in wrestling tournaments, right?
Yeah, it was very tough. I was doing a lot of weight cuts and a lot of it was very tiring, but yeah, and then getting people to fill out the form too that were wrestlers as well. They were not focused at all. I was like, fill out the form, fill out the form.
I did some research on skiers, downhill and cross country, and ski patrolmen decades and decades ago, and I was lucky. I hit a snowstorm and got about 200 responses in the lodge because they couldn't go anywhere. Yes.
Sean, any comments, suggestions for Jaden?
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions for you because I think it's hard when you start comparing multiple sports. So I was a basketball player and a baseball player in college. And I guess to me, I would ask you, Jaden, right? And you can think about it. I know Jack and Dan, we think about a year, not as an academic calendar, but as a school year and as a semester. So I played basketball, which started in the first semester, ran through the second semester, right? That was kind of my main sport. But I had trouble keeping weight on. So my calorie would actually go up, right? And I would argue that my energy level went down because at that time, right, as March Madness kicks, we're trying to get into a tournament, right? We're also going through exams. So to me, I would say, what about time in the school year are you competing and what level is that at, right? So you could even break this up into a high school and college or collegiate level comparison. And then, you might be able to compare maybe multiple sports that way. But again, it's kind of hard to kind of compare different sports like that just because of, right, you have to cut weight. We as basketball players are struggling to keep it on because it's just too hard. By the end of the season, you just don't have a lot of muscle mass left.
Yeah.
So
Kinda.
just kind of your thought on that. I mean, right, for you as a wrestler, I guess, like how does that academic year, like, because when do you start for wrestling / when do you kind of finish?
So we start wrestling right during like December and January, so start of the second semester. And so it is really tough, like trying to start off your semester strong and get all your stuff done while you're
Right.
kind of like tired all the time. Like when I was doing so I also play football, and football too is the same thing because you're struggling to keep on weight during football. I had the same problem. I could not keep on weight for the life of me because practices took up your whole day in school, so you really had no time to kind of eat. But then once wrestling got around, it was kind of the opposite problem. I was tired all the time because I just couldn't focus. I couldn't focus. I wasn't eating because I needed to stay on weight. I needed to stay low weight because I couldn't eat anything. But it kind of does affect your schoolwork in that sense. And I think that's where things such as office hours with your teachers and having meetings and meeting with and having your friends help you out and going to people for help on your schoolwork really does help.
A question vis-a-vis wrestling. and I did a little wrestling in high school, which is half a century ago. But do they have for the wrestling team a nutritionist that helps you balance your weight control with your nutritional input with your mental acuity?
We don't have like a nutritionist. Really, like we never really had like any sort of nutritionist, or we just kind of like figured it out. And like we'd ask like our strength coach for advice and stuff, but we didn't have like a dedicated like nutritionist just for nutrition sort of thing. But yeah, we'd have our coaches kind of help us out, plan out our diet and stuff. Like they'd be like, you can drink this much water today. I wouldn't drink any more than this. I go for a run at this time if you want to eat this kind of.
Yeah, it just strikes me from your report on your own experience of being really short of energy, that was probably affecting your game performance considerably.
Mhm.
So
And that at any rate, I mean, one can talk for hours on that aspect of it. I have a perhaps more research-oriented question. You did what looked like regression graphs, and it would be interesting just to know, and maybe this is as much for you, Dan, what proportion of the variability was being accounted for by the slope of the graph, the R versus R squared, as opposed to a p-value or a significance level, just
I was
to
kind of wondering that
increase
too.
the insight.
Yeah, yeah. I was wondering. Jaden you failed to report the R squared value
So the
on
R
that one.
square value on some of them wouldn't show up on the data classroom,
Mm, mm.
like on it.
Yeah,
So I
Yeah.
thought there wasn't an R squared value on the graph itself.
yeah. So I guess I can help on that one. I would say his p values were fairly large, would indicate that there's not a significant correlation or a significant relationship between those two variables. So I would say it's a very likely it was a very low R squared value. But you'll definitely have to tune in and read his manuscript to find out more.
Oh, I'd be
We
delighted to see
published
all
that.
these manuscripts.
Yep.
But I'm thinking just in terms of the science
Yeah.
itself, and a
Right.
good part of being a scientist is
Mhm.
trying to increase your insight into the problem, perhaps more so than proving a hypothesis. And so, if you can get some insight into the amount of variability that is being
Mhm.
that you're seeing in the distribution, that contributes pretty heavily to your next step in a research project.
Yep, definitely. All right. Well, I think we have a few
Thank
more
you.
presentations to go. And I'll bring off Jack and Sean, and we'll move on to Isaac, which is
Thank-
also going to be. Yeah. Thank you, Jaden.
Thank you for
Did a
everything.
great job.
This has been a great program.
Awesome. I'm glad you felt that way. All right. So everyone, I'm going to bring up Isaac Medina. So Isaac, how are you doing today?
Good. How about you, Dan?
I'm doing great. Are you ready to present?
Yep.
All right. Well, first off, you could introduce yourself, and also I want to mention that Sean was your mentor, so he guided you through this entire process, and we'll listen to another one of, two more of Sean's mentees. But I'm excited for you to share your research. Take it away.
Right. Thanks, Dan. So as you said, I'm Isaac Medina. I'm from Truckee, California, and part of the reason as to what inspired this project here is there's a lot of snow up here, and so my project is on the relationship between global warming and precipitation in Northern California. and Sean helped guide me through this process. So to begin, global warming is sort of like a term that's been used a lot over the past decade, I would say. It's become an important topic for many different reasons. So basically, global warming is just like the increase in surface temperature over a period of time. It's mainly caused by the release of greenhouse gases, and these gases are produced by burning fossil fuels such as like these factories. They produce a lot of oil drilling and energy consumption, things like that. Some of the more common greenhouse gases are carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. And then when these gases are released into the atmosphere, they sort of trap the sun's heat into and it's like facing towards Earth, and that's what causes the temperatures to rise over time. So these two graphs provided by Berkeley Earth and NASA's observatory show an increase from 1860 and 1880 to 2020 in temperature. They showcase a 1 degree change in Celsius. And as you can see on both graphs here, at about around the year 1970, there's sort of a spike in the graph. And from there is sort of where things with temperature take off. And part of this reasoning has to do with the post-World War II era. It's known as the golden era or the golden age. After World War II, economies sort of took off in a way, and they started growing really rapidly. And these impacts that left on global warming and the climate started appearing around the year 1970. So my hypothesis and my scientific question is, what is the relationship between global warming and precipitation in Northern California? Now, my initial theory was that global warming would increase precipitation over time, and that a higher temperature would essentially mean more precipitation and more evaporation. And part of the reason why I believe this is because here in Truckee, there's always a lot of snow each year, but this year we had one of the biggest snowpacks. I think it's the largest one I've ever seen. And so that's part of the reason as to why I essentially thought that precipitation would increase with global warming over time. So before investigating this sort of question, I was curious as to whether my peers at my public high school, Truckee High School, were confident in their knowledge as to how weather is sort of affected by climate or by global warming. So I sent out a quick survey to 60 students that attend my high school. The first question I asked them was, are you confident in knowing what global warming is? And 96.7% of responses felt that they were. The second question, are you confident in knowing what causes global warming? 91.7% were confident in that. So that shows that out of who I surveyed, the majority understood what global warming was. And then the final question was, are you confident in knowing how precipitation is affected by global warming in Northern California? And only 30% responded that they were confident, while the other remaining 70% were more unsure, which leads to sort of the importance of this topic because it is more commonly known as what global warming is and how it's caused, but not as many people understand how it's sort of affecting weather patterns and how it's affecting us in the future. So that's sort of the reason as to why I chose this topic. So to investigate this, I chose to sample 3 locations in Northern California. I chose Truckee, Sacramento, and San Francisco. Truckee is my hometown, and I sort of wanted to see what the relationship was and how it's affecting me and everyone around me. And then Sacramento and San Francisco are 2 major cities that are close by that would also be affected. And so for my materials and methods, this process was I gathered 100 years of the highest precipitation from each location through the NOAA website or the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Basically, this website provides me with a map and that shows all the different weather stations in an area. So I searched up Truckee, Sacramento, and San Francisco in 3 different tabs, and I ended up choosing 4 weather stations for my data. I chose 2 for Truckee, Truckee Ranger Station, and the Truckee Tahoe Airport. I chose Sacramento 5 East and San Francisco downtown. Once I had all of these locations sort of chosen out, the website would essentially provide me with these 6 tabs talking about temperature, precipitation, and any possible snowfall. I use the precipitation tab, and it would provide me with a graph, as you can see on the image on the right, looking something like that for each year that I would select. So I used the dates 1922 up to 2022, and I sort of searched this graph for each year to figure out what the highest precipitation amount was for that particular year. And I essentially repeated this process over 300 times, about 100 times for each location. Now, leading into my results. So this is my first figure. It is 100 years of highest precipitation in inches ranging from 1922 to 2022 in Truckee, California. As you can see from the line, it is a positive linear growth, about an inch growth starting from 1920, and it grew about an inch over the past 100 years. The hypothesis test I did was a linear regression test, and the results showed an R-squared value of 0.111 and a p-value of 0.02, meaning that sort of the correlation between date and precipitation was that there was about, the date was about responsible for 11% of the growth in precipitation in Truckee. My second figure here was 100 years of highest precipitation in inches ranging from 1922 to 2022 in Sacramento, California. Similar to the Truckee one, it is a positive linear growth, a bit smaller than the Truckee one, about half an inch growth over the past 100 years. And the linear regression test results show an R-squared value of 0.094 and a p-value of 0.03. And finally, my third figure is 100 years of highest precipitation in inches from 1922 to 2022 in San Francisco, California. Again, just like the other 2 graphs, it was a positive growth, linear growth, and the linear regression test results showed an R-squared value of 0.148 and a p-value of 0.01. So essentially, all these 3 graphs proved my hypothesis to be correct in the fact that precipitation would increase over time. Now here, so yes, it has been scientifically proven that as temperature increases, it causes a change in the water cycle that causes evaporation rates to go up and evaporate faster, which will eventually lead to harsher precipitation. However, that is not the only variable affecting the data, as there are tons and tons of variables that sort of affect how precipitation changes throughout time. One of the major ones being evapotranspiration, which is the amount of evaporation and transpiration combined. So transpiration plays a huge part in changing how precipitation grows throughout the years. If an area is sort of hotter, it will, just like evaporation, it will transpirate a lot quicker, and the plant will release water at a faster rate, whereas lower temperatures would slow down the transpiration rate. It also depends on sort of the area they're in. These plants, depending on the type of soil they're growing in, let's say the soil that they're growing in is very, very dry, and it's lacking of water, then the amount of water that plant absorbs is sort of the amount of water that the plant absorbs is less, meaning that the amount of water they release will be less as well. Whereas if they're growing in more moist soil, the amount of transpiration they will release will be much higher because they have a higher intake of water from the soil. And then angiosperms, which make up for 80% of the plant species, are the types of plants that have the highest transpiration rates. they essentially have more cells in their stomata, which is where the transpiration process happens, and they're able to sort of maximize their photosynthesis process in a way which causes higher transpiration rates. Other variables that may affect the data are pressure zones, prevailing winds, and elevation. As pressure zones, the pressure in Northern California is rather high, higher than, let's say, Southern California, and that can actually cause a decrease in precipitation, as it may sort of dry up the air and reduce precipitation levels. Prevailing winds, there are some winds that come from the Pacific Ocean towards Northern California, and these winds carry sort of, they carry water and water vapor in them. And so once they reach the surface or land, it will cause the area to be more moist, which can increase precipitation. And the final one being elevation. This one is more particular to Truckee, as we are located in the Sierra Nevada mountains. The higher the elevation, the air sort of reacts in a different way and produces more condensation, or the formation of clouds, which essentially just will eventually cause harsher precipitation. For future research, it would be super cool to do research on precipitation in Southern California cities. The area in Southern California is known to be more dry and prone to droughts. So it would be cool to kind of see if there is an increase in precipitation in Southern California, or what if there's like a decrease in Northern California. And then also research on precipitation amounts in other countries around the world, not just limited to the United States, would also show some pretty cool results, and it kind of open it up to see like kind of the variety of changes that happens throughout the globe, because the same change is not happening in every single place. So it would be cool to see sort of like the variety of changes happening globally. Some acknowledgements. I would like to thank my mentor, Sean, and Dan, for both of them sort of guiding me through this process, and for Sean helping me with sort of the research factors and providing me with tips and things like that. And for Dan for providing the classes and teaching us all these different things, and for helping me out with graphing and stuff like that. And I also like to thank my parents because they were always very supportive of me, and they encouraged me to take this program. And any Tahoe and Truckee students who participated in my survey from earlier. And then I'd also like to thank my English teacher. His name is Craig Rowe. He teaches at Truckee High School. He's the one who presented me with this opportunity, and he's the one who recommended it to me. And without him, this never would have happened. And I am truly thankful for that. And yeah.
All right, Isaac, fantastic job. Very well done. I'm glad to see it all come together as well as it did. You did an excellent job presenting. Yeah, and also I do want to commend you on taking the extra initiative to supplying a survey before even doing your main research project. I think that was, pretty great to see. And also, the extensive nature of your discussion, diving into all of the different particular causes of what may be, influencing the precipitation. So truly great job on, going in depth and going the extra mile on your research.
Thank you.
So I guess my first question I want to ask you before bringing Sean and Jack up is, what was a highlight and a struggle for you in the program?
So highlight for this program is getting to experience sort of the process of going through this heavy research. It's something that I've never done before, and it's, opening my eyes to something new and what could potentially be a career path in the future. And I've always had sort of like an interest for the environment and, science and math and things like that. So it like kind of opened my eyes to this whole new world, which was really cool. A struggle would probably be less of writing the manuscript and more of finding time to balance writing it with schoolwork and other things. And so I think that was the one struggle I felt throughout this journey, but everything else was like such a great highlight. It was just a great experience overall.
Well, I'm so happy to hear that, and that's the ultimate goal of this program is to supply students all around with the experience of doing research and hopefully inspiring them to go into STEM. So it's fantastic to hear. All right, Jack and Sean, what do you think? And I think I want to start with Sean because you're his mentor. You did a fantastic job here.
Oh, he crushed it. Yeah, great job, Isaac. Yeah, so I guess, Isaac, I do have a question for you that I've been saving for today. And what are your thoughts so we kind of talked about evapotranspiration and things changing atmospheres, and we know, right, as a driver, right, it's been talked about even not only in our real world of science, right, but in science fiction with controlling the environment. But nowadays in sustainability, we talk about green cities, right, creating right some sort of rooftop, whatever it might be, right, green buildings, right, putting plants into buildings. Do you think that could be a viable way to potentially help some of those cities that are going to see, right, drier climates, right? Because like you talked about, great job, right, not everyone's going to have more precipitation. Some places are going to get drier. Some places that are fairly wet are probably going to get drier, right? And that's like we look at areas in the Midwest, right, as potential areas that are going to receive less, precipitation events. Areas that are already receiving precipitation might even just get that much more. So I'm just curious as to, you've done this research and work. So just curious what your thoughts are on this as a potential viable answer to things.
I would say more as it depends how long that transition takes, because at this point we've already sort of launched the climate crisis that we're in, and depending on just like how fast these changes occur, I still think that these changes are going to be happening over the next few years. But I do think that if let's say this type of action starts now, it will definitely slow down the process. But I don't think it'll ever, at least in my opinion, and from what I think, I don't think it'll ever fully stop.
All right. And any comments for you, Jack?
Yeah, you've bitten off a huge chunk to chew on here.
You did.
It's something that I've thought about and actually been a bit surprised. Well, it's been maybe 5 years since my surprise at how fast the climate change has come upon us. And continues to accelerate. I am pleased by your work. I have a couple of comments. One is I think the first and most important is that as you go forward and think about this issue, be careful to pay attention to scale. What's going on, say, in transpiration in one area is a very small portion of what's going on when you look at differences in large areas. Truckee, Sacramento, and San Francisco are more affected by a global movement of air than they are by the local movement of air. So you're looking at two very different scales, and it's behooves your research and its importance to focus on a scale rather than trying to mix and match scales at the same time. I would make a comment on one word you used in your results part, and that has to do with philosophy of science. And you said something would be proven, and I don't remember exactly what it was. In science, we don't really prove anything or disprove anything. We get increased understanding or realize that we have less understanding than we had before. And so you're always looking at, as I mentioned for somebody else, likelihood ratios of what one hypothesis or theory or law, and law is in quotes because law implies from the legal world a truth, and truths aren't part of science. Approximations are. So just sort of be real careful in your terminology in that aspect of science. I guess my last thing is to help you look at the larger scale. You did put up a map of air currents. I believe it was air currents anyway, worldwide. You might look at and ponder the many aspects of the website earth.nullschool.net, which is just a really fascinating day to day. It's updated about every 15 minutes on real time worldwide of what's going on in all sorts of factors of temperature and water pressure and air pressure and the currents in the oceans. And that should give you a new insight as to what really is going on between temperature and precipitation. At any rate, thank you for jumping in on it. It's a very important topic these days, and probably much more important than 99% of the population, including us scientists, understand.
And you only had a couple weeks to do it, so you bit off
Yeah.
a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Good
did
job.
pretty well.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yep. Did a fantastic job. All right.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm going to bring Sean and Jack off. And then, so I do have a question from the audience, if you'd like to take this. So Shark Khan is asking, what advice do you have for other kids who want to participate in the program?
I would say go for it, like if there's even like a slight like thinking in your mind, if you have this like any thought in your mind that like, oh, should I do this? I would say go for it, because whether you find out like towards the end, if maybe this isn't something for you, then great, you figured it out. But I feel like this process is sort of a once, like at least during like high school years or like your youth years, it's sort of like a once in a lifetime chance. And it's like, I honestly, like growing up, I never thought that I would get to do something like this. So like, I think it's honestly a really cool experience, and I think like go for it,
That's great to hear. And then we actually have one more question, and then I will bring you off. And then so this is Jen Cotton. She also works for Headwaters Science Institute as our outreach manager. What was your favorite part of doing this project?
I would say my favorite part of this project was sort of putting the graphs together once I had the completion of my data sets, and sort of seeing, once I got the graph put together, sort of seeing that growth in precipitation and seeing how it has been, changing over the last 100 years, over the last century. And I think it's really cool to get to see that. And it also made me feel like sort of accomplished in a way, because like every single one of those like data points was from me, like I achieved those. And so I think like seeing that graph like assembled was definitely my favorite part of this project.
Yeah. It's awesome to hear, Isaac. And yeah, you should feel very accomplished in what you did. You did an excellent job. All right. So everyone, now we have two more presentations left. I'm going to bring up Dia Patel. How are you doing, Dia?
I'm good.
All right. Are you ready to present today?
I am.
All right. Well, good luck and take it away.
Thanks. Okay, so my project was on students' knowledge on animal agriculture's and effects, and Sean Wesley was my mentor. So, what is animal agriculture? Animal agriculture involves the branch of agriculture that concerns animals that are raised to create animal products like beef, chicken, eggs, all those kinds of things. And production of animal products has a really significant impact on our environment. For example, agriculture, primarily animal-based food production, is responsible for up to 70% of freshwater usage and 30% of greenhouse gas emissions, and it also uses up to one-third of cultivable land. These impacts are also not really widely discussed by large environmental activism groups, and this lack of discussion results in students having very little knowledge on the effects. um, for example, a study conducted on students in Israel displays that their knowledge on the environmental impacts are low, even though they had pro environmental attitudes. And another study, which analyzed Portuguese textbooks in schools for information on farm animals and their sustainability, found that the textbooks represented only mentioned animals with a sufficient well being, and it determined that environment and sustainability within the topic wasn't really widely covered. And so, this lack of discussion can be super harmful for our environment's future, as teenagers and high schoolers are a large part of helping the environmental crisis. And then, without knowledge on the topic, it could be hard for teenagers to do anything to help solve our issues. So my research question was, are high school science students aware of the extent of the effects on our environment of animal agriculture? And I hypothesized that most students will have minimal knowledge on animal agriculture, but will have some awareness of the impacts of animal-based food production on the environment. So to understand the amount of knowledge high school students have on animal agriculture, a survey was created, and it consisted of 5 simple questions regarding participants' knowledge. The survey was distributed to around 200 students ranging from grades 9 through 12, and the survey is shown on the right. And the questions were: circle all the science classes you have taken or are taking since the beginning of ninth grade. How much do you know about animal product production? How much do you know about animal agriculture? Did you know that animal byproducts have significant impacts, such as contributing to greenhouse gas emissions and water pollution? And finally, do you think that having a sustainable diet, which is eating more plant-sourced foods, can help lessen the impact of climate change? The questions were created in a brief way, which were super easy to answer, because I know that a lot of students like to go through surveys really fast, and they were easy to answer, so we would have a more accurate understanding. And then the responses were then analyzed using a range of tests like linear regression and t-test to compare the questions and understand their knowledge. So this first graph is kind of just a general look into their knowledge on animal agriculture, and then from the graph we can see that majority of students have little knowledge on the topic. And then the second figure is just displaying the amount of students who are aware that animal agriculture has negative impacts. And then we can see that most students are aware of this. So the third figure is just comparing the participants' general knowledge on animal agriculture and whether they're aware that it has significant impacts. And to analyze the data, a t-test was performed, and the results showed that there is a p-value of 0.36, which concludes that there's no really direct relationship between their knowledge of the topic and the awareness of impacts when it's compared to the significance value of 5%. And then similarly, this graph shows the general knowledge on animal product production compared to, or whether it has an effect on whether students believe having a sustainable diet will help solve our environmental issues. And a t-test was also performed, and the p-value was 0.48, which also showed that there's little relationship between their knowledge and whether they believe sustainable dieting will help. And then this graph is determining whether the amount of science classes taken affect the students' knowledge on animal agriculture. Each science class has 4 credits, and they were all the science classes each student took were totaled up. individually. And the results of this linear regression had a p-value of 0.1 and an r-squared value of 0.014, which indicated that there was very little relationship between these two variables. So the hypothesis was validated by figures 1 and 2, which showed that most students had little knowledge on animal agriculture, but they're aware that it has impacts. And then these results also display that even though some students may have little knowledge on the topic, they still have a sustainable mindset, meaning that they think a sustainable diet will be beneficial to the environment. And then these results can correlate with the findings of the similar study conducted on students in Israel that I mentioned earlier. The study's main data shows that students had minimal knowledge on the environmental damage caused by livestock industry, but they still had a pro-environmental attitude. And overall, the research just helps us understand that animal agriculture needs to be more widely discussed and taught to students in school because it has very significant environmental impacts. So for future research to get a better understanding of how much teenagers know, the survey could be distributed to a much larger sample population and students around the world, because people in different places could know different things. And a question that could be asked are, why are students aware that producing animal products has negative repercussions, but don't have extensive background knowledge on the topic? And then from this question, we can also ask, from what sources do students learn this information where they only know a little bit about the topic? And another question that can be asked is, in what ways can having a broader knowledge on the topic help the environment? And finally, how much information on animal agriculture is taught to students? Based on the findings of my project, it's likely that the topic isn't widely taught in schools. So we can also ask, for what reasons is animal agriculture not widely taught in science classes? And these are my works cited.
All right, Dia. Great job. Great job. Fantastic. I really want to commend you on your ability to get, what was it, close to 200 individuals to take your study. So my first question is, how did you really accomplish that?
Yeah. So Sean recommended that I ask teachers to distribute them. So I did, and I did physical copies so that like I knew that students would take it, because I know Google Forms, like a lot of people tend not to answer.
Yeah. Well, great job on your research. Okay, so I'm going to bring up Sean and Jack, and we can have a quick Q&A. So Sean, how about you kick it off?
All right. Well, first of all, Dia, obviously, great job. Yeah, like don't give me all the credit on that. Yeah, we sat for a while and talked about how to get that many people, because we talked about having an N with just, such a small number just doesn't give us that. So yeah, my question, Dia, would be, like, now that we've seen this data, how would you go about kind of creating that change? Like, do you have a thought as to how, you would do something like that? Is that something we need to implement as part of our science classes, right? As scientists, like, how do we make sure that information is known?
Yeah, I think that like social media, like TikTok and Instagram, I know a lot of teenagers are obviously always on that. And so posting like thoughts and ideas on this could really teach people about the topic. And I know I've been influenced from TikTok a lot. So yeah, just posting stuff on that could really help.
Jack, any comments?
Yeah, I have a question. It wasn't clear, mostly because I didn't have time to read and think about it, I guess. Were all your questions in your questionnaires self-reporting as to the amount of knowledge the student thought they had about the information, or did you include anything uh, open-ended that would give you feedback on whether, in fact, they really did have knowledge?
The questions were kind of just like they weren't really open-ended because I wanted them to be so simple so students could answer them. So yeah.
Yeah, but I guess the point I'm asking is, or it seems to me that the questions that I saw you ask um, relied very heavily on the students being honest. And having training in psychology, I know that that's not always the case. Uh, and you might think in the future, if you do more of this type of research, which I hope you do because you look like you have skill at it or building skill at it, uh, to make sure you have a question or two in there that gives you feedback as a researcher on the reliability and validity of the responses you're getting.
Can I step in? Part of that
Sure,
too,
of
Jack.
course.
We talked about this a little bit, right? Part of the problem that we saw was giving a bunch of students and then taking teachers' time away from their classroom time. And so part of that we kind of talked about, right? We were like, okay, we can't take up all their time. And so part of that, we just kind of had to understand that it had to be a quick process that teachers would then allow to get a larger, to get a larger N. We needed to make it quick, simple, and fairly painless as it would.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand that problem very well.
Mm-hmm.
Still, as a researcher, you need to do something to validate your answers, and maybe as a first step, I can understand that it isn't that important, and it's much more important that Dia got the experience of actually asking questions, actually going after her own ideas. And you've done a great job, Dia. I just am trying to give you a hint for the future and for thinking about the paper that you're going to write and thoughts for the future, rather than just more is better. Maybe refining or thinking about and talking about refining the questions themselves or the whole array of questions.
Yeah.
I was hoping
And
that was going to be our discussion point.
yeah, that's cool. Sorry to do your work for you.
No, it's okay. I appreciate it.
And I guess the other question I have is, can you crystallize in your thinking and for us, your audience, what specific environmental impacts you think the animal agricultural industry is actually having on the environment?
Yeah, I think that a lot of animal product production uses a lot of water, and I think that's one of the biggest things. Um, and also, I think something that I didn't know about until this year was that it also has a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. Normally people think that it's just fossil fuels um, that contribute to climate change, but it's also this.
I would suggest you look at one more aspect of it, in terms of the broader ecology of the biosphere, and maybe do some research to verify the notion that I've heard, which is that something in the neighborhood of an excess of 90% of the animal biomass on the planet is in service of the human food chain, which means that a tremendous amount of the natural environment has been dwarfed and resources taken away from them. And thus it's been a degradation of wildlife populations pretty significantly. And that
Yeah.
may be even more important than our immediate need for water. And at any rate, that's some food for thought for you that may be eye-opening.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
It's
Well,
like our biosolids project down here. Sorry, we're tracking phosphorus from these agriculture farms all the way to the coast, right? So we're looking at eutrophication, all the way covering to the coastline. So it's a big topic.
yep. Again,
Good job, Dia.
Thank you.
Yep. Great job. Great job. And even here, we have a comment from the audience. Great job, Dia. So again, fantastic work. So what I'll do is I'll pull Sean and Jack back off, and I just have one more question. We had a question from the audience. So do you think the rise of social media may have created a bias in your sampling?
Yeah, like I said earlier, posting things on TikTok and Instagram will or could really help other people know. So obviously, it has probably educated kids that or students that I surveyed. I mean, yeah.
And then I think I'll end this with just a very general question. What was a highlight and a real struggle for you during the program?
A highlight was definitely like getting to know the scientific process. I have done like a couple of things like this in the past, but I feel like this was really different and way more in depth. So I feel like I learned a lot from that. And a struggle was probably just honestly writing the manuscript. I feel like I have a lot of ideas. It's just hard to like get them down.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, again, great job, Dia. And yep. All right. So Isaac Pacheco Martinez is our final presenter today. How are you doing, Isaac?
I'm pretty good, Dan. How are you?
I'm doing great. So are you excited to talk about your research to everyone?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
All right. Take it away.
Yeah, for sure. So my name is Isaac Pacheco Martinez, and I'm currently a rising senior at North Tahoe High School. And my research was on the impact of the Palisades Tahoe proposed village plan on the Tahoe Truckee area. So just starting off with how important historical data is, as it provides valuable insights into the wildlife frequency, but also the intensity and the impacts on the region that it occurs in. And also, just as many of you may know, factors that influence wildfires could be the climate conditions such as temperature or the amount of precipitation, but it could also be human activity such as land development. And just like from where I am, Tahoe Truckee, as a few other students from here are, a notable wildfire that has happened in Tahoe Truckee history is the Angora Fire of 2007, which burned down 3,100 acres and also destroyed 254 homes. And I just brought this up because an increase in tourism has been seen, and also as well as development in the Tahoe Truckee area, and it has led to an increased wildfire risk. So just talking about, where the Tahoe Truckee area gets its water from, a majority of it's from snowmelt. As you know, we get a lot of snow up here in the winter from the Sierra Nevada mountains. It melts and then it replenishes the rivers, the streams, as well as the reservoirs. But also just like year-round rainfall contributes to the water, to the surface water buildup, and just, groundwater that's stored in underground aquifers. But also, most importantly, I would say, is Lake Tahoe, which is fed by the snowmelt, rain, as well as small tributaries such as the Truckee River. And so, as I kind of mentioned before, the Tahoe Truckee region has experienced a 32% increase of overnight visitation between 2010 and 2018. And I'm just, the Altera Mountain Company's redevelop an expansion plan project for the Palisades Tahoe Ski Village, formerly known as Squaw Valley, would increase the number of visitors and generate revenue, but also it would exacerbate environmental challenges. And that's kind of what my research revolved around, was how this proposed village plan would affect the surrounding area, because this proposed plan includes the construction of these like high-rise condos, as well as a roller coaster and this 90,000 square foot indoor water park, as well as, employee housing, but also a lot of parking spaces and just places for, more people to come up. And so the hypothesis of my research really was that urbanization would increase the likelihood of wildfires. And, the materials that I used to perform my research were Lake Tahoe water levels for the past 5 years, as well as the normal precipitation of South Lake Tahoe, Secchi disk average data of Lake Tahoe, and also just historical wildfire incidents of the Lake Tahoe area for the past 5 years. And talking about Secchi disk really quickly, if you do not know what that is, it's this black and white disk that you kind of just throw into the water, and then you measure its depth and you make it go deeper and deeper until the point where you can't see it. And at the point that you can't see it, that's where you measure. And it's just like a way to measure water clarity, essentially. So I collected my data from the United States Geological Service, as well as the National, as well as the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association and the U.S. Department of Agriculture, as well as the National Interagency Fire Center, as well as just this the data, and I just analyze the data by time. So as you can see in my graphs, it shows that my first graph shows that Lake Tahoe water levels have just been decreasing within the past 5 years. It's, as you can see, 2018 compared to 2020 is far lower. And then my normal precipitation it's a little harder to see, but it's fluctuating, but mostly decreasing by year and also by month. There's a few outliers in months such as February and January, but it's relatively the same. And for Secchi disk average, as I said, it's mainly fluctuating, but you can see a decrease as well. And for, my like final amount of data, it's a little harder to see, but it's just, I gathered the data of soil pH for the surrounding 5 miles of the Palisades. And although most of the data was, unable to be found, it's a majority, or like the soil that I have shows that it's slightly acidic, all surrounding, Palisades Tahoe. So with this, I could, just come to the results of that there is decreased water levels from 2018 to 2020, as well as decreased precipitation in South Lake Tahoe over the past 5 years, and that water clarity has been fluctuating, and that the soil surrounding the ski resort is slightly acidic. So with this, I could talk about how the reduced water availability may lead to drier conditions and would increase the wildfire risk, as accumulation of flammable materials such as like dead and dry leaves would, become more abundant, and that could start a fire far easier. And then just, talking about like a potential that could come with those forest fires, harmful algal blooms could actually begin developing in this like Lake Tahoe, which is very, very close to the Palisades Tahoe ski resort, as ash and debris from the wildfires could, lead to more nutrients in the area. And these algal blooms would cause dead zones in water bodies where there would be little to no life in those areas. And just continuing. So as I said earlier, since the area's pH is slightly acidic, this could affect nutrient availability and just the plant communities and ecosystems of the surrounding areas if it were to get even more acidic with time. And then just like talking more about the actual construction of the like proposed village plan, land clearing and excavation and grading could cause soil compaction, erosion, and sedimentation. And all of these, forms of construction have been clearly been said to been used in like the building of the or the village plan. And then just, harmful materials that would be used in the construction, such as like fuel and chemicals, could contaminate the soil if they're not handled properly. So just with my, what I could conclude is that there would be a need for sustainable development practices if this were to be built in the Jack, for providing me information and a lot of mentorship on how to write my research paper, as well as my mentor Sean Wesley for his support and just all of his guidance. He was very, very understanding and like very, very kind the whole time, and he also helped me learn a lot. So I'm very appreciative of that. And then just Headwater Science Institute for providing me with this opportunity. I've never really had the opportunity to do something like this, so being able to do this my junior year was really amazing. And yeah, thank you.
All right, Isaac, fantastic job as always. Yeah, the past three presentations are really great. So I guess we have a few questions to field from the comment section first. So I'm going to bring this down. So this seems to be a very hot topic within the Truckee Tahoe area, and you seem to have learned much more about it. I personally can't imagine, although I'm not native of the area, I can't imagine there being a roller coaster within the Truckee Tahoe area, and I don't know where all of that would fit. But have you looked into how to bring this to your local government?
Yeah, actually. Well, I haven't really done anything so far, but as of now, I'm in the process of joining the Placer County Youth Council. So I would actually go to the county and, talk about this and think, or, just add the input of what like people of my age are actually thinking about it. So yeah, definitely.
Well, that's great. And then also, so do you think you intend on, building upon this research and actually using it to leverage in your position potentially at the council?
I think, yeah, like if I were to be accepted, I would really seriously think about it. It would be really interesting.
That's great to hear. All right, so I'll bring up Sean and Jack for our final Q&A. Sean, just as ever, another one of your mentees doing an excellent job.
But yeah, I mean, no shock there. Isaac, you did a great job. But yeah, like, so the thoughts through this whole process, we've talked a lot about a lot of topics to cover all this. As far as kind of compartmentalizing it all, I guess I'm going to give you a more of a social question. How does that feel just because it is in your home yard, right? I mean, one of the biggest things, I guess I'll finish it this way, right? We talked about science being kind of like your story to tell with data and evidence, an evidence-driven story. So, how does that feel being, that this is your backyard?
Yeah, I mean, it's like something that I was definitely really passionate about going into this program. Like from the beginning of the program, I was like, how could I, do something that has to do with this? Because it's been a really big deal, like in my community and especially in my high school. A lot of like the people that I go to school with like have very strong opinions, and I do too. Like it's a really big deal. It would really affect everyone that kind of lives in this area. So yeah.
What about you, Jack? I know I think you're a native of the Truckee Tahoe area, are you?
Well, I'm a native of California.
California, okay.
And pretty widespread. From Pasadena, well, from San Diego to Redding, I guess, is my tromping ground. Wasn't aware of this development proposition, and so that was interesting to hear about roller coasters. I'm not sure what all is involved there. You covered a lot of ground in your presentation, and I guess my question is, what do you think is going to be the most salient or the most important issue as far as whether to go ahead with the project, or if they do go ahead with the project, to watch in terms of impact that may be needed to be mitigated by councils or counties or the Tahoe Basin?
Yeah, so I mean, if it were to just go through, like if it were to begin being built, I think that the most important thing that people should be looking for is whether they're actually practicing sustainable, like development plans or like construction, I guess. And that would just be like, being able to like, oh man, sorry, it's not coming to my head, but yeah, I guess just being able to like use sustainable development plan or methods, because that's like if like everything else would just come naturally, like everything that I talked about, like the disruption of not like habitat, it would all just end up happening. That would probably be the final thing to just look out for.
And can you expand on what's your concept of sustainable in the truck? Is this actually a question first? Is this development proposed for the Truckee area or more down in the Tahoe Basin itself?
I would say it's more for the Truckee area, since Palisades Tahoe is like going into Truckee. Basically, it's very close to it. So, but they're both very close to each other.
Okay, and my recollection is Tahoe itself is downstream of the Truckee area. And so anything that would happen in the Truckee area would impact by runoff, by virtue of runoff, the Tahoe basin itself, since it all gets deposited down there. So when you say sustainable, what factors or what aspects of the environment there in the basin and in the Truckee area do you think would be most likely to be most impacted?
Well, I think that it would just be like the thing that would be most impacted would probably just be the like wildlife and the surrounding environment. But talking about renewable like development, I guess that I was just like talking about using renewable sources of energy that don't really emit like greenhouse gases and things like that, because that would just be very harmful.
All right. So I guess the last question, while we have both of you up, thank you, Jack and Sean, so much for your participation in the Q&A. Are there any final closing marks before I remove you permanently for the rest of the presentation?
Well, I think you get good marks, both of you, for having mentored these students through this process, or as one of them called them, kids. Yeah, I'm still a kid too, even pushing. No, you don't want to know how long I've been working at this.
All right. What about you, Sean?
Everyone did a great
comments?
job. So, no, I think everyone did a great job, and it was good. Good meeting you, Jack. And as always, it was a pleasure, Dan. So, it was a good time. Like I said, it's always fun to see the culmination of all the hard work, over the past several weeks. So, really enjoy that.
Well, thank you both so much for attending and your input. Much appreciated.
Isaac, great job.
Good job.
Take care. All right. So, Isaac, final question I have for you. What was your highlight and struggle throughout this entire process? Oh, no, I think we lost him. Give it a second, everyone. Okay. Now we can hear you. We lost you for a second.
So I guess that since my project was more data mining oriented, a struggle of mine was kind of just like, collecting data from reliable sources. It took longer than I thought it would, but I think that it was worth it for sure. And I guess that the best part about it was there was like days where just, working on it was like really enjoyable. It was at times like the most relaxing part of my day. It was really nice to like sit down and just start writing. And I think that it's just like a really great process of writing a research paper. So yeah.
Great. Well, again, fantastic job on your work, Isaac. And it was a pleasure, working with you as well as all the other students throughout the program. All right. Take care.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. Again, just a few closing remarks. All of the students put forth immense effort into creating all of these various research presentations. Essentially over the past 14 weeks, they, as you've seen, they all came up with their own novel research ideas. Everyone did a fantastic job. And keep in mind that they're all performing this balancing act of, doing extracurricular activities, doing schoolwork, working on their research, attending sessions after school. So this was always something additional that was on their plate, and they did a fantastic job of that balancing act and being able to complete all of their research projects. So, everyone did a fantastic job. And again, if any of you students are interested in participating in the program, we have we have registrations open for our summer research experience. And also, the reason why we're able to keep, these programs, relatively affordable is through our donors and in collecting donations to help also supply, financial aid to individuals who want to participate in this program that typically might not be able to participate otherwise. So big day of giving. I know the banner's been, going at the bottom of the presentation the entire time, but, Headwaters Science Institute truly appreciates any type form of donation that you're able to offer. If you're a researcher, you can help volunteer, and be a researcher and work with students. That's also another form of donation. You can go to bigdayofgiving.org/organizations/headwaters to donate to us as well. So again, we appreciate all of our donors, appreciate everyone involved in the research experience program. And, I hope all of you, the one thing you can take away from this tonight is that, the students did a fantastic job, and we should never underestimate, the ability of these young individuals to conduct research. Yeah. Take care, everyone. Good night.